you have a 25% higher chance as a violent white criminal of dying at the hands of a police officer than you do as a black criminal.
Okay, let me just read you this right here, what she's saying, because she's being very deceptive. You have a 25% higher chance of dying in the hands of a police officer if you are a violent white criminal. Violent is the key word you're looking for, my friends. Violent. So if you are violent, as in you are a potential threat to the police officer, like you are a significant risk to the police officer because you're violent, then perhaps you're more likely to die if you are white versus black. More statistics. When factoring in threat level, black Americans who are fatally shot by police are, in fact, less likely to be posing an imminent lethal threat to the officers at the moment they are killed than white Americans fatally shot by police. Hey guys, it's Rose and welcome back to Cheap Lazy Vegan and another video. So as you guys can see by the title, this is not a very typical video that I would make, but I felt it in my heart and in my soul to respond to some of this nonsense. So this is not drama, this is not a personal thing, but it is so much about what I believe is right. I just felt in every cell of my body that I just absolutely had to respond to this. So here we go, guys. Are you in for a wild ride of actual facts and actual statistics and actual education? Let's go. So for those of you that don't know, Freelee, the banana girl, made a video titled, "I do not support Black Lives Matter." Now, I just want to preface this video by saying that just because somebody doesn't support an organization doesn't necessarily mean that they don't support the cause that the organization represents. For example, a lot of people might not support PETA, but they might still support the cause of animal rights. So I'm not going to hate on her for not supporting Black Lives Matter as an organization. What I want to argue is some of the misinformation that she is putting out there to her pretty massive audience. Second point that I want to make is that I feel like it's really ironic because Freelee just keeps saying in this video to educate yourself and to do the research, but there's literally no research that she puts out there in her video. Her research is literally a video by Candace Owens. That's not research, and maybe she did her own research, but I feel like if you're going to put out certain claims, you should be backing this up with actual facts and not just some tweets and some videos by black conservatives. Just having a few black people agreeing with your narrative, it doesn't prove any points, and it doesn't prove that systemic racism is not an issue.
You can hate me. It's fine. I'm not here to be your bestie, okay? I'm an educator. I'm here to speak the truth on my platform.
It's really ironic that she's saying that she is an educator, yet she has failed to educate herself on the topic of systemic racism.
I'm not dependent on Patreon money or donations or paid by someone or some organization or anything like that.
Now, Freelee is saying that she is not funded by organizations or Patreon or anything, but it's ironic because the person that she is basically referring to, which is Candace Owens, is quite well known to be, allegedly, I'm just going to say that, funded by conservative organizations. And she's also someone that denies the existence of climate change and denies a lot of things that actually happened in history, so she's really just not a credible source. But I'll get to her in a bit.
Because I've seen a lot of people on social media who have just been posting because they have felt intimidated and bullied and they're not being authentic and genuine. And that makes me sad.
I'm really not on the camp of bullying someone into posting about something, and I feel like that happened quite a bit during this time, and I think a lot of influencers felt a bit pressured and also felt a little bit like harassed and not knowing what to do. So a lot of people might have posted things without really thinking too much about it because they didn't want to be labeled as, you know, a racist or something like that, which I think is wrong. I don't think we should be, again, pressuring somebody to post about something, especially when we don't know their story. Just because they don't post something on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube doesn't mean that they are supporting, you know, white supremacy or anything like that. It could mean that they're doing their own research and finding out information, because I was definitely on the camp of educating myself a little bit before speaking out about something just to jump on some sort of bandwagon. So I agree with what she's saying. I don't think you should be pressured to post anything like that. And I think this is actually why she became inclined to kind of believe in some of these narratives that she believes in, is because she didn't want to be called a white supremacist. So instead of, you know, doing the research behind what's happening on this cause, she decided to turn the back on the cause and go with the narrative that she decided to go for. At least that's my assumption. Obviously, I don't know what's going on in her head, but That's my assumption.
The media hysteria, the media propaganda has got to a lot of your minds, and it is controlling you like crazy.
It's funny how she says that the mainstream is brainwashing us and, the mainstream media is manipulating us when the biggest cable news network in the United States is Fox News, a very conservative news network that spews out the exact same garbage that Freelee is saying in this video. That is the mainstream, okay? Fox News is the mainstream.
And I didn't even want to get into this situation, but there's so many people trying to say, if you're vegan, then you must speak up about this George Floyd death.
Again, she seems to be really upset because a lot of people are, messaging her or were messaging her and pressuring her to speak out on something that she was probably not really aware of. And again, I don't think that's fair. I think that's where a lot of this anger and frustration came from. I just don't believe in harassing people, bullying people, and calling people racist because they didn't say anything on Instagram. So I definitely am with her on that. What I'm not with her on is basically everything else in this video.
Veganism is about non-human animals. Those who are trying to say, oh, it's also about, humans are also animals. Humans are the ones who are the perpetrators.
So I do kind of agree with Freelee here that veganism is a specific movement for non-human animals. Now, do I think that you're a hypocrite if you are, for the equal treatment of animals, but then you don't care about human rights? Of course I do. But yeah, I do think that someone can be potentially vegan, but also sexist. Does it make you a hypocrite? Of course it does. I just feel like we should just talk about equality and fixing these issues rather than just calling somebody not vegan for something. Someone could be a racist, but also not a sexist, or, the other way around. Someone could be sexist, but not racist. And so those things could exist. But again, is it hypocritical? Should we still be fighting for other things? Absolutely. But I just don't see the point of, just calling someone out and saying that they're not vegan just because they, might not fully understand this, Black Lives Matter movement or anything like that. So yeah, I hope that makes sense.
This media propaganda, it's just taking over everybody's psyche, basically. And this is exactly what the system wants to divide and conquer.
Okay, so this is exactly what the system wants. It is to divide and conquer. That's assuming that we're not already divided by the system. So let me just read you a little statistic here. The US makes up about 5% of the world's population, yet about 21% of the world's prisoners. Okay, I know Freelee is all about anti-establishment. I think that's what she's trying to get at. Well, this is the establishment. This is it. Private prisons. This is the establishment. These prisons are putting people in jail because it is profitable. And they are using the people in jail to do free labor. Okay, this is a thing. So I don't get how you can sit there and seriously discuss this issue about how these forces are trying to divide us. They're trying to control us when the very thing that you're saying that you're against is doing exactly that at this moment. Let me read you a few more statistics here. In the 2015 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, it was found that blacks and whites use drugs at a similar rate, but the imprisonment rate of African Americans for drug charges is almost 6 times that of whites. African Americans represent 12.5% of illicit drug users, but 29% of those arrested for drug offenses and 33% of those incarcerated in state facilities for drug offenses. Black people, white people are using drugs at the same amount, but the chance that you're going to get arrested and incarcerated is much higher if you are black versus if you are white. Let me read you another statistic. African Americans are only 13% of America's population, but a majority of innocent defendants wrongfully convicted of crimes and later exonerated. They constitute 47% of 1,900 exonerations listed in the National Registry of Exonerations. So based on the number of exonerations for innocent people that have been wrongfully convicted of crimes, about almost 50% of those exonerations were African American. And they only make up 13% of American population. So don't tell me that there's no such thing as systemic racism. I don't think she's being racist. I don't think she's being a white supremacist. I just don't think she understands what we are trying to say here. I don't think she understands the real statistics. Now, this is why I keep telling people, watch 13th. 13th is a documentary. It's on Netflix. It's also on YouTube. I'm going to link it down below. It is so important to watch this because it actually tells you exactly what is wrong with this system and why all of these racial issues exist. You can't just look at, 2020. What's happening in 2020? Is there a law that says black people can't vote? Is there a law that says black people can't do this? No, of course not. It's not overtly stated like that, but all of those racist policies that trickle down from generation to generation have an impact still today because those haven't been rectified.
The Democratic Party gets 95% of the black vote, and the reason they get it is because blacks are convinced that the number one issue facing the country right now is social justice, racist white cops, discrimination, systemic racism, microaggression, whatever new word they come up with, and it's a bunch of nonsense.
Always using the race card because they know it divides people.
It's already divided. It's already divided. Here's another statistic. The median wealth for white families in America is $170,000. For a black family, it is $17,000. That is 10 times the amount. Black families are much more likely to be in poverty. 17,000, that's a median wealth, okay? But Rose, it's not a race issue. It's a socioeconomic issue. It's a poverty issue. But you cannot divide socioeconomic issues in America, especially specifically in America, with race. You cannot divide those two things. They are so interconnected. The reason why you can't divide socioeconomics with race in America is that the racial divide that happened as a result of slavery, the Jim Crow laws, which segregated black people from white people for many years, those have not been dealt with. Okay, maybe they got rid of them, but the issues that happened, the problems and the disparities that resulted from those racist policies have not been dealt with. So because of that, it created a bigger divide. And I shouldn't say we, I'm in Canada, but in US, they did not deal with these issues. Nothing has been rectified. Those problems have just been passed down from generation to generation. It's just been creating a bigger divide, because what happens when you have, poor people, when you have people living in extreme poverty compared to those living in, extreme wealth, you're gonna have differences in crime. Of course you are. If you're living in a poor community, you're gonna have more crime. This isn't rocket science. Of course that's going to happen. But those crimes and those poor communities happen as a result, a very direct result from racist policies that have not been dealt with. That is the problem.
Is that we must never forget that economics was the reason that black people were brought to this country. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. If I right now decided that I wanted to play Monopoly with you, and for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money, I didn't allow you to have anything on the board, I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa, that was Rosewood. Those are places where we built black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So that's 450 years. So for 400 rounds of Monopoly, you don't get to play at all. Not only do you not get to play, you have to play on the behalf of the person that you're playing against. You have to play and make money and earn wealth for them, and then you have to turn it over to them. So then for 50 years, you finally get a little bit and you're allowed to play. And every time that they don't like the way that you're playing, or that you're catching up, or that you're doing something to be self-sufficient, they burn your game. They burn your cards. They burn your Monopoly money.
It's not like slavery was abolished and then black people and white people just started off on a clean slate. Black people did all of the manual labor. They did all of that hard work. They suffered greatly as a result and kept none of the actual fruits of their labor. Nothing was done to rectify what happened. They were just technically free, except for in the case of if you are punished for a crime. So this is where the loophole begins, okay? So let me just read you, and this is the whole point of the movie 13th. It talks about this loophole and how it's used as a way to still incarcerate people, especially people of color. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution abolished slavery and involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime. So that is the loophole. So even after slavery was abolished, there was a point in time where black people were being arrested and convicted for extremely minor crimes, like loitering or something like that, and then they were forced to do manual labor and to rebuild the economy in the South. Let me also remind you that the Jim Crow laws, which segregated white people from black people for many years, so those laws only ended in 1960s. That was not that long ago, my friends. It ended in the 60s, and those were very overtly racist laws that were incredibly harmful to the black communities, causing them to suffer greatly as a result. To pretend that those issues, those laws, and the problems that those laws created did not trickle a few decades, it's literally delusional. It's literally delusional. I don't think that Freelee understands the the historical context here. I didn't understand this until I started actually doing research on this topic. Nothing was done to fix the situation. Nothing was done to fix the problems that happened as a result of slavery and segregation. You did not start out on a clean slate. You already created huge disparities between white people and black people. There was still so many racist people within government, and to pretend that those issues are just gone because those overtly racist policies are gone is complete nonsense. So I'm going to delve a little bit into some of the history here that I think is really important. So the Nixon administration, which was I think in the 70s, okay? So Nixon administration started what was called a war on drugs, okay? Which basically began the era of mass incarceration, putting massive amount of people in jail, especially people of color. People were being put in jail for very low-level drug crimes, like possession, for instance. And this specifically targeted people of color. We know this for a fact because later on, the Nixon administration admitted that the war on drugs was just a ploy to throw black people in jail. Nixon advisor John Ehrlichman, sorry if I'm saying it wrong, said the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. That is a quote from the Nixon administration admitting that the war on drugs was just a ploy to throw black people in prison. Another way to look at this is that back then when crack cocaine became very popular, the punishment for crack cocaine was 100 times worse than the punishment for owning, for possession of just cocaine, powder cocaine. That's mainly because powder cocaine is a rich person drug and crack cocaine is a poor person drug, and it's found in urban communities, in black communities. So that also targeted people of color. And then in 1981, Reagan's campaign strategist, Lee Atwater, was caught on tape explaining the Southern strategy, which is the strategy to win the Southern vote by devastating communities of color. Let me just say, he was caught on tape saying exactly this. I'm just going to repeat what he said. You start out in 1954 by saying N-word, N-word, N-word. He said it, I'm not going to say it. By 1968, you can't say the N-word. That hurts you. Backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. You're getting so abstract now that you're talking about cutting taxes, and all these things that you're talking about are totally economic things, and a byproduct of them is that blacks get hurt worse than whites. So in other words, what he's saying is that back in the day, you could be very obviously racist, you could be overtly racist, and get away with it. But unfortunately, as time went on, we can't really be as, straight up racist anymore. We have to do it slightly more subtly. We have to do it in different ways, like, coming up with different economic terms, okay? But the end result is the same. The end result is that black people still get hurt worse than whites. He was caught on tape saying this in 1981. Not that long ago, my friends. I was born in 1988. I'm pretty sure 1981 was maybe around the time that Freelee was born. Not that long ago. So to pretend that these issues are just vanished, nobody's racist anymore. Oh my God, like no one in government is racist, even though, most people in government are pretty old and they probably still hold those very similar beliefs. I'm trying to be fair to Freelee because I don't think that she knew the history. But I feel like if you don't know, then maybe you should not talk like this, Do your research. For someone that keeps telling people to do their research, she really does not do any research.
Get this through your head. They're taking away our freedom. They're dividing us through this mainstream narrative, and then they're conquering us. And who are they? That's what I want you to research and educate yourself. Who's behind the curtain with these big banks? The elite minority. Look into the families behind this. Look into the history.
Oh, the irony. Look into the history. Look into the history. Okay, well, I just told you the history. I just gave you the history lesson there. And also, I'm just going to give you a few more statistics. Did you know that the likelihood of imprisonment for black men is 1 in 3? That means 1 out of 3 men are going to go to prison. Black men account for 6.5% of the USA population, yet 40.2% of the prison population. Let me read that again. Black men account for 6.5% of USA population, yet 40% of the prison population. Here's another stat for you. About 70% of people locked up in jails are waiting for their cases to go to trial. These are people that are locked up before going to trial, before they were found innocent or guilty. They're just people waiting for trial. So we don't know if they're innocent or guilty, but they can't leave because they can't afford bail. The reason why a lot of these people are locked up, is simply because they can't pay their bail. They're waiting for their trial and they can't pay bail. We don't know if they're innocent or not. Another disturbing reality. More than 90% of state and federal criminal convictions are the result of guilty pleas, often by people who say they didn't commit a crime. More than 90%. That means more than 90% of people are not going to trial and they are taking a plea deal. Okay? They are taking a plea deal so that they don't risk getting a harsher sentence in trial, because that's usually what they're threatened with. They're threatened with a much harsher sentence if they go to trial. And also they have to sit in jail for God knows how long. So they're sitting in jail because they can't afford bail, which usually impacts poor people, and usually that means poor people of color. Another interesting and very educational documentary you should watch is Explained, the episode on the racial wealth gap, which kind of delves into this a bit further. Again, this is why you can't really separate people of color with, poor communities, because it's just all very intertwined in the history of America. You really can't have a discussion about, socioeconomic inequality without having a discussion about race. So the case I want to talk about is the Khalif Browder case. The 16-year-old boy was locked up in prison for 3 years, 2 of those years being in solitary confinement for allegedly stealing a backpack. He was offered a plea deal multiple times. He was offered many, many plea deals so that he would plead guilty and, potentially leave jail. But he didn't take it because he knew he was not guilty. He ended up leaving prison after 3 years without a trial. They just ended up letting him go because prosecution did not have anything to go by. But he ended up rotting in prison for 3 years. 3 years as a 16-year-old, rotting in prison for 3 years. He was very brave to not take a plea deal because, like we said, about 90% of people take a plea deal because the conditions in which he was under were horrendous. He got beat up multiple times. He was in solitary confinement. So the fact that he didn't take a plea deal is actually an exception. It is absolutely mind-blowing. It is so brave that he didn't do it, which means so many people do take a plea deal. So many people end up taking a plea deal, whether or not they are guilty, because they want to get out of the prison and they want to, be free. But then what happens when you take a plea deal and plead guilty to a crime, whether or not you did it, is that now you are convicted. Now you are a convicted felon. And when you are a convicted felon, you lose your right to vote. It's going to be hard for you to find a job. It's going to be basically very difficult for you to be a member of society, an upstanding member of society. So if Black people are more likely to be arrested and more likely to be incarcerated for minor offenses, and they're more likely to rot in jail because they can't afford to pay bail, they're more likely to also be wrongfully accused of violent crimes like murder, for example, or wrongfully accused in general. If they are more likely in all of these statistics, then they are also more likely to plead guilty to crimes that they did not commit. Okay? I'm not saying all Black people are innocent, but they are more likely to plead guilty to crimes that they did not commit. And we've seen that in the statistic. Oh my God, I can't talk. That means that they lose their rights. They lose their rights of being a citizen. They basically become a second-class citizen because they lose their rights that a normal citizen would have if they weren't a convicted felon.
There is so much you are not learning, you are not exposed to because you're only watching the mainstream social media and you're stampeding with the herd without actually educating yourself. If the herd is charging in one direction, stampeding, then you got to go the other way. Okay, we are not at the point where the herd is going in the right direction. Hopefully one day we can get there, but this is not that day. This is not a revolution.
It's like she's saying a lot of stuff, yet she's not giving any real examples about what we're missing here. She's saying we're missing all of this information. We're missing all of the facts. But where are the stats? She's not giving me any examples about what we're missing here. Where are the stats? What are we missing exactly? Where is the history lesson? Tell me more, Freelee, because I think I've given you quite a bit.
Friends, I am seeing something that is completely disturbing to me. And when I say to me, I mean as an American first, then I mean as a member of the Black community. I'm seeing people, white people, that are getting down on their knees and asking for forgiveness for nothing that they ever did wrong.
Okay, so I don't believe in the notion of white guilt or that, the idea that white people should feel guilty or apologize or kneel or do whatever because they're white. Okay, I think that's nonsense. I don't think that that's productive. I don't think that it's necessary. Obviously, you just being white doesn't mean that you are just automatically racist. Like, I don't believe that. I don't think that you should feel guilty for being white. I think that's a bit ridiculous. But I think what we need to do is look at the current injustices and talk about reform, talk about what things need to be changed, speak out against these injustices. Again, just discuss what needs to be dealt with. This is what didn't happen when, abolishment of slavery happened. It didn't happen when Jim Crow laws were abolished. And so that's why people are talking about it now, because the damage that has been done as a result of, all of the years of racial segregation, that damage has not been dealt with. So again, I don't believe that you should be, apologizing or feel guilty for being white. I think that's ridiculous.
Reaction, emotion, reaction without even really questioning the mainstream narrative. You gotta question. Never stop questioning. Why did you stop questioning? Why did you just take on the mainstream media's representation?
Once again, Fox News, a very pro-Trump organization, a very pro-Trump conservative news network, is the most viewed news network in the US. And they would love this video by you, Freelee. They would love it. They would definitely play it if they saw it. So what you're saying is the mainstream representation. That is the mainstream media representation. What people are doing on social media is trying to fight that.
I've been receiving comments like this, and others have been, on Instagram. I haven't seen you posting anything about Black Lives Matter. If you remain silent, here comes a threat, we know where you stand. And I'll have no choice but to expose you as a white supremacist.
Again, she keeps repeating these messages that she's been getting. And again, this is why I keep thinking that that's why she, decided to go the other direction. Because she got fed up, she got tired, she was upset that she was receiving all of these messages and these threats. Which is why, again, I don't believe in these threats. I don't believe in harassing somebody. I don't think it's productive to, harass somebody on DMs. I don't think it's productive to expect every influencer to speak out just because, not everyone has the knowledge. Not everyone has the know-how to speak out, and then they might believe some other narrative, and then that's more dangerous. You see what's happening here? Like, ooh.
I don't appreciate being called a racist just because I haven't posted anything about a situation that I didn't even know about.
Well, there you go. See, she keeps saying that she doesn't appreciate being called a racist because she didn't post anything about a situation that she didn't even know about. Her main reaction, instead of going to do research about the situation, she instead went to people like Candace Owens and Black conservatives, basically anything that supported the agenda that, she shouldn't feel bad or anything like that. I don't think she should feel bad, okay? She's a white person living in Australia. This is obviously an issue in the States, but I think this is why she decided to go the other direction. I hope Freelee actually does some of the research, because this is pretty intense propaganda that she's spewing out without actually understanding the actual, statistics. But anyways.
The fact is Black Lives Matter movement, it seems to only care about black lives when there is a white perpetrator. That's just how it appears to me. Statistics show that the most violence isn't happening from white cops to black individuals, it's actually happening black on black.
Okay, so I just want to point out that when you have a society where a group of people are very oppressed and they live in very harsh economic conditions, and the disparity is huge between white people and black people, that means those black communities have very few resources, especially in a country like US that's very heavily built on capitalism and built on the notion that, you don't take, handouts from the government, and those social programs are not as heavily, invested in. When you live in those communities with very few resources and very little wealth to build up on, that translates into more crime. That's just the fact. So I'm not saying black communities are innocent and that they are not committing crime. What I am saying is that we need to look at why those crime rates are so heavily prevalent in those communities. And also, again, important to note, when you throw people in jail for minor offenses like drug crime or maybe allegedly stealing a backpack, and then you release them back into society without any real rehabilitation, but as second-class citizens that can't vote, that have a hard time finding a job after all of the violence and all of the harsh realities of living in prison, then you just throw them back into society. They will probably become worse criminals in the future. So it's just like this vicious cycle of throwing potentially innocent people, or people that may have done some sort of, stupid thing, like, doing some drugs. I don't know. How many people have done drugs in their life? Come on. People that may have done some stupid things when they were young, throwing them into prison, throwing them into a violent and unfortunate situation where they don't have a chance to rehabilitate, yet they, maybe encounter worse criminals criminals. Maybe they get beat up. Maybe they get sent to solitary confinement, whatever it is. And then they get thrown back into society and they have to basically try to live as a normal member of society. Again, with 90% of them taking a plea deal, meaning that they, plead guilty to potentially a crime that they did not commit. And then they go back into society as a criminal where they can't find a job. They can't find, at least they have a hard time finding a job. And then they're also treated as second-class citizens. And then you expect them to just become an upstanding member of society? Really?
But you wouldn't not acknowledge that there are some systemic issues.
Give me an example. Tell me what you think the most systemic racist issue is. What is it?
Well, I would say that because black people in most cases, in many cases, were descendants of slaves, that racism as an institution, that it just, a certain amount of it just exists.
2015?
The reality is that these issues don't exist in a vacuum. You can't just look at 2015 or 2016 or 2017, just only that, and base all of your assumptions on that year and what happened that year. We're not starting out on a clean slate. I'm going to read you a quote from the movie 13th. Throughout American history, African Americans have been repeatedly controlled through systems of racial and social control that appear to die but then are reborn in new form, tailored to the needs and constraints of time. After the collapse of slavery, a new system was born called convict leasing, which was a new form of slavery. Then a new system was born, a Jim Crow system that relegated African American residents to a permanent second-class status. And now we have a new system of mass incarceration, which strips millions of poor people, overwhelmingly poor people of color, of the very rights of the civil rights movement. So that's the meaning of systemic racism. It's not that you have to look at, oh, what are the laws right now? What are the policies right now? Is there any overtly racist laws? Any overtly racist policies? No, you have to look at what happened in history and how those historical things still impact today. Let me also reread a statistic from before. African Americans are only 13% of the population, but a majority of innocent defendants wrongfully convicted of crimes and later exonerated. They constitute 47% of 1,900 exonerations listed in the National Registry of Exonerations. About 50% of the exonerations are African American people. So there you go. There is the proof there that there is such thing as systemic racism.
They are taking away your freedom, just slipping it out from under your eyes, and you don't even know. You're too busy fighting with each other. You're fighting with other people you should be uniting with. Turning this into a race issue when the statistics simply don't back it up.
Turning this into a race issue when the statistics don't back it up. I think I just gave you a bunch of statistics to back it up, but let me read you some more statistics, okay? Judging from exonerations, innocent black people are about 7 times more likely to be convicted of murder than innocent white people. African American prisoners who are convicted of murder are about 50 times or 50% more likely to be innocent than other convicted murderers. I know that all this time has passed. I know that it's been a few decades since the end of Jim Crow. So apparently racism is gone, but the thing is, like I said, it's impossible to divide socioeconomic issues with the issues of race in America. At least right now, it's impossible because of the history, because the economics of America was found on racist policies. Those racial issues and those racist policies were a reason for the economic disparity, the extreme economic disparity that we still see today, because there were no reparations. So you really cannot divide the issues of socioeconomics with race. You can't.
And now we have people completely destroying their neighborhood, turning it into a war zone, looting, destroying, the local economy, destroying the lives of more black people, more people in general. More people have been killed. It's absolutely sickening. If we're going to destroy our own neighborhood in protest of more rights, it doesn't make sense.
Look, I'm not for looting. I'm not for violence. I'm not for destroying property or anything like that. And honestly, I have watched videos of people that have lost, their small business, and it does break my heart so much. Of course, I own a small business. That's awful. And this is why you need to not brush this aside. Okay? Listen to these people, because this is the inevitable result of a society that is so heavily divided and a society that keeps pushing down those people that are already down. I just feel like it's so ironic that Freelee just keeps talking about the divide and that the mainstream is trying to divide when it is divided. It is divided. I'm sorry, but not just with race, but with income. I mean, when you have a society when the people at the bottom are constantly being pushed further to the bottom and then the people at the top are just shooting their way up to the fucking stars, people are going to be pissed and they're going to retaliate. They're going to retaliate. The violence is the inevitable result. I don't want the violence. It's a shitty situation. I don't want to live in a society with violence. But that's why when you have a society with so much disparity and so many pissed off people, you're gonna have retaliation. This is what happens. So instead of pushing aside what these people are saying, instead of ignoring what these people are saying, instead of just looking at, oh my God, the violence is so bad, why don't you look at why they're being violent? Why don't you look at why they are fucking pissed? Okay? If we were to talk about, like, in terms of the vegan thing, if an elephant escaped their circus and trampled on their owners, Freelee would definitely say, I mean, they were asking for it. I mean, of course they're going to be angry. Of course the tiger or the elephant is going to be angry. They've been locked up. They've been oppressed. They've been treated like garbage for so long. Of course they're going to be angry. They're gonna retaliate. These are animals we're talking about, but I mean, I think same goes for human behavior. You're gonna piss people off, you're gonna abuse them, you're gonna oppress them, and then you expect them to behave cordially. You expect them to, like, stand there with a candle, just, like, you know, asking for peace. No, it's been done. It's been done. People have done it in a non-violent way. They have. A lot of people have, and nothing has changed. That's the thing. These violent acts don't come out of nowhere. People don't just start being violent for no reason. There is a reason for this. So listen to the reason, because if you keep not listening to what these people are actually saying, instead just blaming the violence and just blaming the people that are protesting and not listening to why they're protesting, the violence is going to continue. I can guarantee you the violence is going to continue if you don't actually listen to the issues.
I want to come out and say that I do not support George Floyd and the media depiction of him as a martyr for Black America.
So this is an issue that I am not here to address, okay? I want you to realize this is a divide and conquer. This is election motivated. This is propaganda motivated. This is one world order motivated. This is a message I want to communicate to you, okay? Not so much about this, what she's talking about.
What I'm saying is not any defense for Derek Chauvin. I hope Derek Chauvin gets the justice that he deserves to be, implemented upon him. But George Floyd is being uplifted as an amazing human being.
Look, I don't know if George Floyd is being uplifted as an amazing human being. I don't see it as him being uplifted as an amazing human being. I see it as him being a victim of police brutality and him being a symbol of police brutality and him being the straw that broke the camel's back. This is a bigger issue than George Floyd. And what I found disgusting about Candace Owens' video was that, she kept saying the whole time, she's like, of course, I want justice for George Floyd, but she kept focusing on issues that weren't issues at all. He was high. Why is this relevant? This is not an important point to add at all. I know she says that, but the fact that she says it in the first place means that she's trying to get something out of it. She's trying to distract you from what's actually happening, the actual message. Okay?
First and foremost, George Floyd at the time of his arrest was high on fentanyl and he was high on methamphetamine. This came back.
Okay, so that is an important point to actually add, that he was high on fentanyl. And fentanyl is something like 50 to 100 times, I know there's a big disparity, but it's something like 50 times more powerful than heroin, stronger than heroin. This is a very strong drug, okay? And whether that can affect your breathing, it kind of like you'd think it would. And obviously, if you've got amphetamines in your system, these things are not going to help your survival.
It's not important whether or not he was high, okay? Because I don't care if he was high or drunk. The fact of the matter is, someone stood on his neck. Someone knelt on his neck, okay? It was clear. It was clear why he died. It was clear what killed him. If someone stood on your neck for 8 minutes or over 8 minutes, it's safe to say that you're probably going to die. If you watch the clip, you would be delusional to think otherwise. Unless you're blind or delusional to think that he died of anything other than suffocation. And he was in handcuffs, okay? This was a guy that was in handcuffs and he had a guy kneeling on his neck and suffocating him. This isn't some case of drug overdose. It's not. And the independent autopsy results stated that he died of asphyxiation from sustained pressure. This is after the Hennepin County medical examiner claimed that they found no physical findings to support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. I mean, what a joke, okay? The proof is in the video. We saw the video. So who's really controlling the narrative? Obviously, they're hiding something.
When he is put into handcuffs and is put against the wall, a baggie of what looks to be like cocaine or it's white. It's a white baggie that he drops onto the floor that you can see.
Okay, so he was a drug taker, maybe a drug dealer, I'm not sure. Okay, but for me, it doesn't impact on the situation so much because he died and he didn't deserve to die in that way. And Candace is not saying that either.
It's just so wonderful that she just keeps bringing up these facts that are so irrelevant to the case. As if it was so relevant that he had a bag of drugs or that he was high, like he had drugs on him, like, oh my God, he's such a terrible person. She just brings up these facts like, oh, he had a bag of drugs. But I mean, he didn't deserve to die. I'm not saying that he deserved to die, but let me just defame him for a second and let me just, talk about how he was a major druggie. But then I'll just say that he didn't deserve it. Look, I'm not saying that George Floyd was some, incredible hero. Okay, I don't know anything about George Floyd. The fact is that this was an unjust murder and one of many examples of police brutality. He is a symbol of an innocent man being killed, being murdered by police as a result of police brutality.
He has a rap sheet that is long, that is dangerous. He was an example of a violent criminal his entire life.
And all of these crimes that he committed were, I think the latest one was like 2005. And again, I'm not saying that he's innocent and I'm not saying that he maybe didn't deserve to get arrested or whatever it is, okay? But we know that there is a process. There is an innocent until proven guilty process. He was murdered. He was unjustly murdered. That is the entire point.
Why are we pretending that this criminal should be upheld as a citizen, as a martyr in Black America? A martyr for a fake narrative, by the way.
Fake
police
narrative.
Brutality, racially motivated police brutality is a myth.
Fake narrative, really? Really? So in the US, African Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. We're gonna talk about this a little bit more.
Because of this incident that rarely ever happens in America, so here are some numbers.
There you go. Okay, and she is right.
Come on, Freelee. This is your research? This is your research? This video by this person that is most likely heavily funded by conservative organizations that many would say is a fraud. That's your research? This is your research? This woman that denies the existence of climate change is your research. Please do more research. Findings from the National Violent Death Reporting System. The results: victims were majority white, 52%, but disproportionately Black, 32%, with a fatality rate of 2.8 times higher among Blacks than whites. Most victims were reported to be armed, 83%. However, Black victims were more likely to be unarmed than white victims or Hispanic victims.
For you people that are still believing that police brutality is a real, racially motivated police brutality is a real thing. First and foremost, okay, you have a 25% higher chance as a violent white criminal of dying at the hands of a police officer than you do as a Black criminal.
Okay, let me just read you this right here, what she's saying, because she's being very deceptive. You have a 25% higher chance of dying in the hands of a police officer if you are a violent white criminal than a Black criminal. It's hard to pick up. You have a 25% higher chance of dying in the hands of a police officer if you are a violent white criminal, meaning violent is the key word you're looking for, my friends. This is what she's being dishonest about, and I don't think she's stupid. I think she's being deliberately dishonest. Violent, okay? So if you are violent, as in you are a potential threat to the police officer, like you are a significant risk to the police officer because you're violent, then perhaps you're more likely to die if you are white versus Black. Okay, more statistics. So, an independent analysis of Washington Post data on police killings found that when factoring in threat level, Black Americans who are fatally shot by police are, in fact, less likely to be posing an imminent lethal threat to the officers at the moment they are killed than white Americans fatally shot by police. The only thing that was significant in predicting whether someone shot and killed by police was unarmed was whether or not they were Black. Another study found evidence of a significant bias in the killing of unarmed Black Americans relative to unarmed white Americans, in that the probability of being Black unarmed and shot by police is about 3.49 times the probability of being white unarmed and shot by police on average. So if you are unarmed, as in you are posing no real threat to the police officer, then you are 3.49 times more likely to be shot by police than white people if you are black. So this 25% more likely is a very, very deceptive way of trying to prove that there is no systemic racism. So this is why you can't take what this person says seriously.
Last year, a total of 9 unarmed black men were killed by police officers, and 19 white men were killed by police officers. For those of you that aren't good at mathematics, right, you might be thinking, oh, but Candace, white people represent 60% of the population and black people represent just 13% of the population. It doesn't matter what percentage of the population you represent, it matters what percentage of the violent criminal community you represent. And unfortunately, black community commits a disproportionate amount of crimes compared to the white community. Let me tell you, 6% of the population, right, black men, 6% of the population account for 44% of all murders in this country, according to 2018 statistics. And yet white people who represent 60% of the population, we represent 13, black men are 6%, only represent 50% of all the murders, right? That makes no sense. That makes no sense. A 6-point variation.
Let me just reread another statistic that I read earlier. African American prisoners who are convicted of murder are 50% more likely to be innocent than other convicted murderers. 50%. And let me just say that it's not just about racist cops, okay? It's not as simple as cops are racist or there's all this like bias and the corruption within the cops. Like, it's not that simple. It's obviously a much broader and a much heavier issue. There's so many factors to take into consideration. So it's not as simple as, oh, a bunch of cops are racist, okay? And I mean, it's probably right. There's probably more crimes happening in black communities. But again, let's talk about why. You know, let's actually discuss why there might be more crime in communities of color. You know, why? It's not like people are just born criminals. It's not like we're just born and I'm just gonna be a criminal for sure, no matter what my circumstances may be. These things don't just happen in a vacuum, okay? People aren't just born violent. Maybe some people are, but very much not likely, especially when you see such patterns, okay? These communities, they don't have power, they don't have resources, they don't have money, even though their ancestors built the wealth of the country, and the white people of today are still profiting and benefiting off of that. Again, I don't think that you should feel guilty because, again, you can't help when you were born or how you were born or in what circumstances you were born in. But we need to acknowledge that these things exist. We've already discussed black people are more likely to be wrongfully convicted of crimes. They're more likely to be incarcerated for drug offenses, like minor offenses. So then you are going to put the guilty stamp on these people. You're going to convict them, okay, throw them in prison, which already sets them back however many months or years, and then they're gonna come out as convicted felons. It's gonna be harder for them to find a job. They're already in poor communities because obviously, you know, they're black, they're living in poor communities because of all of the issues that we discussed today. And then you're surprised that there's more crime in these communities. You're surprised that people are, you know, committing crime in these places. Let's discuss why.
The media teaches those watching that black people are victims. Okay, that if you're black, you are a victim. There's basically nothing you can do about it. You've been a victim from the start. It's white people's faults. They are the perpetrator. They are the oppressor. They are the guilty one. And we should be basically sorry and sad and, you know, forever feeling this way. Even though we have nothing to do with the historical situation, you know, especially in black America. I'm not going to get into that in detail because YouTube will probably delete the video, but that was not us. You know, I made the statement that America is not racist, and it's true. A country in itself cannot be racist.
America is not racist. Look, she's made zero effort to actually talk about any of the history that still has made an impact to this day. And to pretend that the history doesn't have an impact on the current climate is just delusional. You know, none of it has been rectified. None of it has been fixed. I'm not saying you should feel guilty or ashamed, once again, if you're white, but we need to have intellectual conversations about the real disparities and, you know, how these people can be supported. I'm not even American. I care about this. I mean, anyways.
The police officers have way more to be fearful of in the black community than the other way around, okay? We commit, on average, a police officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black person than the other way around. Okay? So this entire narrative is complete smoke and mirrors. It's all made up. It's just election fodder.
I agree. Smoke and mirrors, election fodder.
So she just said that police officers are 18 and a half times more likely to be killed by black people than the other way around. So I actually delved into this statistic. I'm gonna link all the resources, by the way, down below, but I'm gonna read you this. It's gonna be long, but I think it's important because it's a very misleading statistic that she's saying right here. It's very important. Pay attention, okay? This is how this person got this statistic. 36 unarmed black male victims of police shootings in 2015 measured against the total black male population. So that turns out to be 0.0000018 unarmed fatalities by police. Okay, so 36 unarmed black male victims of police shootings measured against total black male population. That's compared to 52 law enforcement officers being killed, and she came up with a per capita rate of officers being killed of 0.00082. Assuming that over the last decade, 40% of all cop killers were black, this would yield 21 cops killed by blacks in 2015. She concluded an officer's chance of getting killed by a black person is 0.000033, which is 18.5 times the chance of an unarmed black person getting killed by a cop. Now, the problem with this number, and I got this from the article below, but the problem is that the number 18.5 was calculated by using the number from unarmed black male victims of police shootings. Okay? So, shootings. George Floyd did not die of a shooting. Okay? So instead of using the chance of an unarmed black person getting killed by a cop, you use the number for unarmed police shootings. So, a lot of people did not die of a police shooting, like George Floyd did not die of a police shooting. In fact, the actual number for that is 76. So 76 unarmed black men died at the hands of police in 2015, not 36. That's twice the number. So already the number is false. It's falsely represented, okay? Because people don't just die because they get shot. Another important thing to note is that unarmed, that can be taken a little bit out of context. Tamir Rice had an airlift pistol. John Crawford had a BB gun. So how many black men were killed in total, armed and unarmed? 295. So that's a lot more than 36. Of course, it doesn't mean that the entire 295 people weren't posing a threat to the police officers. Of course, some of them were probably shooting back at the police officers. Just because someone is armed doesn't mean that they were using the weapon or trying to use the weapon or shooting the police officer. It doesn't mean that. They could have just literally just had something on them. They could have had like a gun in one pocket and then maybe tried to take out their wallet in another pocket and then get shot. So just because someone has a weapon doesn't mean that they were using it or posing an imminent threat. Okay, I don't know how much of that number, the 295 number, how much of those were, real threats. I'm sure some of them were, but I'm sure some of them weren't. There was a case I remember of a guy that got pulled over by a cop. A black guy just got pulled over by a cop, and you have to say, "Oh, by the way, I'm carrying a weapon, and I'm just telling you that I have a gun, but I'm going to reach for my wallet." And then the white police officer freaked out immediately as the guy was reaching for his wallet, shot him. So these things can happen. Okay, so that's another thing that you have to take into consideration. Just because someone is armed doesn't mean that they necessarily were posing a threat, is what I'm saying. Let's also look at the calculations for white men. So let's look at the stats. Whew! The person that wrote this was using the same kind of way that the original person calculated these numbers, okay? So approximately 22 cops were killed by white people in 2015, okay? So that's 0.000035. There were 45 unarmed white men killed by cops in 2015, according to the FBI. So out of the population of white men, which gives us a number of 77, okay? So a cop was 77 times more likely to be killed by a white man than an unarmed white man is to be killed by a cop. So black men are apparently 18.5 times more likely to kill a police officer than the other way around or something like that. But when it comes to white people, a cop was 77 times more likely to be killed by a white man than an unarmed white man to be killed by a cop. Keep in mind that this was the same way to calculate the math that the original person did. So it might be false. Like I'm not saying that this number is, true. Some statistics point to that. It's actually higher than that, but it just shows you that this number is very manipulative, essentially. So it doesn't point to the conclusion that black people aren't being unjustly killed by white people at a much higher rate.
If you want to attack a community for accidental slayings or brutality, did you know that doctors accidentally kill 250,000 people every year because of mistakes? Did you know there's been doctors that
This is important.
have been arrested for being serial killers that just were killing people because they wanted to? Do we protest and boycott doctors? Do we assume all doctors are horrible human beings because some doctors are? Or do we realize that society is not perfectible? People suck in every profession. It is no excuse to paint society with a broad brush.
The thing is, it's not just about police officers. Like I've said before, it is a much bigger issue. There are so many things that we have to consider, which is why this is not an easy battle, you know? You have to look at the bigger picture. It's about the entire system. The fact is that there are so many people sitting in prison right now because they cannot afford bail, even though they haven't gone to trial. They have not been convicted of anything, but they are sitting in jail because they cannot afford bail. And the fact is that over 90% of people take a plea deal, whether or not they are guilty. And another fact is that innocent black people are more likely to be convicted of violent crimes than innocent white people. The fact is that black people are more likely to be living in poverty because of the system that oppressed them from the very beginning that has never been fixed. Those black people are more likely to be living in poverty. They're more likely to be convicted of a crime that they did not commit. They're more likely to be jailed for drug offenses. And they're also less likely to be able to afford bail because they are more likely to be living in poverty. And because they're less likely to be able to afford bail, they are more likely to take a plea deal because they don't want to rot in jail waiting for their trial. Also, they don't want to be threatened with a harsher sentence. So then they are more likely to be convicted felons because of this intertwined system that we're talking about here. So it's not a simple issue, is what I'm saying. This is a very complicated issue. It's not, for lack of a better term, black or white. It's not that simple. So no, it's not just about demonizing police officers. It's not just about pointing your fingers at police officers, calling them racist. It's so much more than that.
You want to know the best way to avoid not being brutalized by a police officer is to limit the amount of encounters you need to have with them, especially when it comes to violent crimes.
The best way to not be brutalized by a police officer is to limit the amount of contact you have with them, is what Candace Owens is saying. So a study of nearly 100 million traffic stops from around the country has concluded that on average, black drivers are 20% more likely to be pulled over than white drivers. In certain parts of the country, like Missouri, for instance, black drivers are 91% more likely to be stopped. Let's also look at the stop and frisk numbers, okay? So for those of you that don't know, stop and frisk is a policing technique. It was used in New York City. I think it's used much less now because of so much scrutiny, where basically police officers can temporarily detain, question, or search civilians without evidence or any reason for that matter. So let me give you some numbers here. So this is most recent statistic. 2019, the percentage of people who were stopped were 9% white, 29% Latino, and 59% black. So basically, 90% of people who were stopped were non-white. They were African American or Latino. Out of those people stopped, 66% of the 13,459 people stopped were innocent. So majority were innocent. But that's not even it. So these numbers were much worse historically when stop and frisk was used at a much higher rate. So this has actually gotten better because back in the day, this was used incredibly so. So for instance, in 2010, over 600,000 stops were recorded. Now these are the numbers that were recorded. Now we don't even know what the potentially real numbers are, but let's just go with that. That's still a lot, okay? Over 600,000 stops were recorded. Out of that number, 86% were innocent, 59% people were black, 33% were Latino, 9% were white. So the great majority were innocent people, yet about 90% of people stopped were black or Latin American. You keep saying don't have encounters with the police, yet you have these instances where black people and Latin Americans, basically minority groups, are, heavily targeted. Heavily targeted. And most of them were innocent. So what are you saying? What are you saying? Do you actually believe the words that are coming out of your mouth?
It's so easy to be a victim. It's so easy to ask white people to bow down and apologize and do all these things for us. It's crap. It's crap. It's a lie. It's a farce. Our biggest problem is us, okay? It's why we don't talk about it when black on black crime happens. It's why we don't talk about it when...
I truly believe that she is trying to empower black people.
Look, you can empower black people. I also don't believe in having a victim mentality, but when a system is so rigged against a group, you have to question it. Even if you're innocent, you could be stopped and frisked. You could be falsely accused of a crime, more likely so than your white counterparts, and then put in jail and not be able to afford bail. You know, you just have this system that's rigged against a group. Okay, it's rigged against this group. I'm not saying you should play a victim, but you're gonna have to try and fix this issue. It's not gonna be easy to fix it because there are so many layers, but you'd be in denial. You are in denial if you think that this race issue does not exist.
So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made, and then for 50 years, every time that I played, if you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood, how can you win? So the social contract is broken. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. When we built it in Rosewood and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract, and they are lucky that what black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
We celebrate our drug dealers. We're the only community, right, that would ever create hashtags to free people from prison because they committed crimes, like free Meek Mill, free this rapper, free this rapper. How hard is it to not spend multiple times in prison? How difficult is that? Is that too hard for us? Is that way too high of a mountain for us to scale, to do the right thing, to be upstanding citizens?
How hard is it to not spend multiple times in prison? Yes, it is hard when you don't have money to pay bail, and when you have to potentially wait 3 years for trial for a crime that you didn't commit, like in the case of Khalif Browder. You know, it is hard when you live in communities that are impoverished and you don't have wealth, and you're born into a society and a system that basically pushes you down further and further. And again, I know that there are black criminals, of course. I'm not here to bow down to black people. I'm not here to say all black people are innocent and that they're all great, fantastic people. But you have a system that's rigged. You do. And without fixing these systemic issues, you can't truly create a society where black people are truly empowered. And of course, some black people are going to be successful. Of course. You cannot take a few outliers of a society and then ignore the big facts. Ignore the facts that pertain the majority of the population. This is a systemic issue. You cannot take these small examples of a society and then ignore the real statistics.
And no, I don't agree with every view that she has in life, that's for sure, okay? But she brought up a lot of important points, didn't she? You know? And I love the fact that she is like, you know, we are not victims. We can do this. We can, you know, we can be successful. I think that's great. That is what her message is.
I mean, I agree. It's a great message. If you ignore the real issues that I just discussed here. It's like we're pretending that everyone is just born completely free of pre-existing conditions and history, and completely free of any societal conditions that we have no control over. It's like they're both pretending that there's no such thing as being born with a certain amount of privilege. Like, we're all just born with a clean slate. Like, our history doesn't matter, our parents don't matter, our community doesn't matter, our society doesn't matter, and we are just born and we are just free to do whatever we want. I mean, fantastic job at ignoring sociology and actual patterns in behavior, the actual issues that exist in society. It's like they think it doesn't matter if you were born in a poor neighborhood with one parent that is in prison because of some sort of minor drug crime and one parent that's working 4 jobs to make ends meet. It's like it doesn't matter that there's not enough funding for public schools in these neighborhoods, in these poor black dominant neighborhoods, so that, you know, it means that these black kids won't get the same education as these white kids, won't get the same privileges as these white kids that might live in much more better communities, might go to private schools. Like, it doesn't matter that black people are jailed at a much higher rate than white people for committing minor offenses. It's like it doesn't matter that there were laws for many, many, many years that disenfranchised black people, segregated black people from white people, and continuously pushed and made worse the disparity between black people and white people, those discriminatory policies. That happened in the 60s. You know, it's like we're pretending that that wasn't only just a few decades ago. What should have been done maybe at that time was, you know, put some funding into black communities, maybe perhaps, but that wasn't done. And now we're kind of looking at the result of all of this devastation and all of these policies that have created this devastation. Then what, we're just gonna pretend that if we work hard, then we can succeed? It's not that simple, you know? Freelee, come on, Freelee. As a free-thinking woman, I expect better from you. I really do.
And I love the fact that she is like, we are not victims. We can do this. We can, we can be successful. I think that's great. That is what her message is. And it's important because the more we call people victims and see them as victims and oppressed, the more they're going to behave that way.
So she says the more we call people victims and see them as oppressed, they're going to behave that way. That's funny because what I like to say is the more we call people thugs and we treat them like thugs, they're going to be thugs. They're going to act like thugs. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of. Black people have been constantly marginalized in US society and treated as thugs. This kind of idea of black criminality has, been passed down from generation to generation. And they have been treated as criminals and thugs for a long time, been criminalized heavier than white people. And of course, then they're going to act like thugs. And she has a point, the more we call victims and see them as oppressed, they might behave that way. I don't agree that people should have a victim mentality and say like, woe is me. I do believe in empowering people, but I think that her message is misguided. I think that we can empower people, but also let's not ignore the real issues that face America. Anyways, so that is it for this video. Again, this is not hate. This is not personal drama. Please, I beg you, Freelee, I beg you, please watch 13th. This is the documentary on Netflix. Again, it's on YouTube as well. It kind of like spells out what I already discussed here. I don't know if Freelee is watching, but if you are watching, and if you really, want to learn about this topic, please watch the documentary. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Again, links to resources will be down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up. Share it with anybody that might pass this narrative, this false narrative around. I think it's important to have these discussions. I know a lot of people are sharing this Candace Owens video. I think it's really disturbing that this is being spread. So if anyone is sharing that, maybe share this message. I don't know. Yeah. That's it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!